Welcome to your deep dive. Today we're diving into U.S. politics and policy.
Okay.
And you've sent us a really interesting mix of news and analysis
Yeah.
pieces from The Guardian, LA Times, and some others, all focusing on recent events that are really kind of shaking things up.
Yeah.
So, so imagine this. You've got a president firing people left and right.
Right.
Whispers of him maybe exceeding his authority. And a Nobel Prize-winning economist basically saying, hold on, folks, we might be headed for a rough economic ride.
Oh, wow.
Buckle up, because we're going deep on this.
It's definitely a lot to unpack. What I find particularly interesting is how these seemingly separate events are all sort of colliding, which could really reshape the political landscape.
Yeah, let's start with President Trump.
Okay.
And all these firings. He's let go of a ton of federal employees.
Right.
Including the person in charge of the agency that protects whistleblowers. And now he's asking the Supreme Court to weigh in on whether he even has the power to fire these folks.
This brings up a really important question about how power is balanced. Within the U.S. government, we have these checks and balances in place.
Right.
And this situation really puts them to the test. Is this a legitimate use of presidential power? Or is it a situation where those checks and balances are being ignored? It becomes even more interesting when you consider Trump's own statement that whatever the president does to save the country is not breaking the law.
Oh, yeah, that statement definitely raises some eyebrows. And what about the impact on the impact of these firings?
Right.
On the people involved, like everyday folks whose lives are being turned upside down.
Right.
Like this park ranger we read about, who lost his dream job and his worry about what it means for the national parks.
Right. It's crucial to think about those ripple effects. Imagine what mass firings at the National Park Service could mean.
Yeah.
You know, park maintenance, visitor experience, even the protection of natural resources, it all comes into play.
Yeah. Okay. Shifting gears a bit, let's talk about Elon Musk. Now, he wasn't elected to anything, but his influence seems to be everywhere these days.
Yeah, his role in this administration has definitely sparked a lot of debate. There's this new government efficiency agency that he's heading, and they're requesting access to some pretty sensitive taxpayer data from the IRS. The potential for privacy violations is a big concern here.
And it makes you wonder, what are Musk's goals here?
Right.
Is he genuinely trying to make the government more efficient? Or is there something else going on, as some critics have suggested, like a hostile takeover of government functions by someone who wasn't elected by the people?
And remember that situation. With the Washington Post, they were planning to run a full-page ad criticizing Musk's level of power.
Wow.
Which really shows you how uneasy some people are about his involvement. Even though the ad was pulled in the end, the fact that they were considering it speaks volumes.
It really highlights that tension between Musk's ambitions and the way the government traditionally operates. Speaking of tension, another hot-button issue is brewing around diversity, equity, and inclusion programs,
Right.
or DEI for short. The Department of Education is threatening to pull funding from public schools that don't get rid of their DEI programs. They say it's about fighting racial discrimination. But the details are pretty murky.
And the potential consequences, particularly for minority students in states that heavily rely on that federal funding, are huge.
Yeah.
It makes you ask who benefits from these programs and who loses out if they disappear. The Department of Education is suggesting that DEI programs discriminate against white and Asian students. But that's a very controversial viewpoint.
It definitely feels like we're wading into politically charged territory here, with different sides interpreting the impacts of these programs in very different ways. And to add to the overall uncertainty, we have a Nobel Prize-winning economist sounding the alarm about stagflation. That's a nasty combination of high inflation, where your money buys less, and economic stagnation, where the economy isn't growing.
This actually ties into the broader picture of global economic uncertainty. The economist we're talking about here, Joseph Stiglitz, suggests that some of Trump's policies, especially his use of tariffs, could discourage investment in the U.S. and contribute to this economic instability.
So that deal-making approach that Trump is always talking about could actually be backfiring.
It's definitely a possibility worth considering. Stiglitz argues that the unpredictable nature of Trump's actions, combined with his tendency to disregard legal norms, can make investors nervous. And when investors get nervous, they tend to hold back, which hurts the economy.
It sounds like a chain reaction, where one decision potentially leads to a whole cascade of negative consequences. Now let's move to the global stage and look at foreign policy. It seems like Trump's deal-making style is causing some serious waves, especially in the Middle East and Ukraine.
Take a situation in Gaza, for example. Trump's plan to relocate Palestinians has sparked a lot of controversy. It's interesting to compare this to previous statements from his own administration. Remember when Secretary of State Rubio, back when he was still a senator, insisted that the situation in Palestine wasn't some real estate deal? Well, now he's deeply involved in this relocation plan, which critics argue is exactly that, a real estate deal.
So there's a disconnect between what they were saying before and what they're doing now. It's a complex situation with a long history of tension and conflicting interest. And speaking of complex situations, European leaders are pretty concerned about Trump's plan to meet with Russia to discuss Ukraine without including them.
Yeah, that move has definitely raised concerns about potential conflicts of interest and the exclusion of key players from these crucial conversations. Ukraine, being the country most directly affected by the conflict with Russia, is particularly worried about being left out. They argue that any kind of peace agreement should involve their direct participation.
It seems like Trump is trying to play the role of peacemaker on the world stage, but his methods are creating anxiety and mistrust.
Absolutely. What's really striking is how Trump seems to prioritize one-on-one deals and personal relationships over traditional diplomacy and established alliances. This has led to tension with European leaders, who feel sidelined and unsure about the U.S.'s long-term commitments.
So we're seeing a pattern here. Trump making bold moves, often on his own, that are disrupting the usual ways of doing things in politics and diplomacy. And that's generating a lot of uncertainty and concern.
Exactly. Both within the U.S. and internationally, it remains to be seen whether these actions will ultimately be successful or if they'll just make existing tensions worse and lead to unforeseen consequences.
Wow, we've covered a lot of ground already. And it feels like we've only just scratched the surface. There are still so many questions left to answer.
There are indeed. It's fascinating how all these events, both domestically and on the international stage, are pushing the boundary of what we consider normal. What the long-term effects will be is something we'll just have to wait and see.
So before we move on, I'm curious to hear your thoughts on all of this.
Yes.
What stands out to you as the most concerning, or perhaps the most hopeful aspect of what we've discussed so far?
We'd love to hear your perspective. What resonated with you? What questions do you still have? Your insights are valuable and can help us all learn and grow.
Remember, this is just the start of our deep dive. There's much more to explore and uncover. Stay tuned, because in the next part, we'll delve even deeper into these complex issues.
As we kind of delve deeper into these issues, a significant theme emerges: the erosion of trust in institutions.
You're right.
It's something we've seen play out in a number of ways throughout our conversation.
From questioning the president's authority to scrutinizing Elon Musk's influence
Right.
and debating the role of DEI programs, there's this growing sense that people are becoming skeptical of those in power, whether they're elected officials or influential figures in the private sector.
And this erosion of trust has far-reaching consequences. When faith in institutions dwindles, people become less likely to engage in the political process, to adhere to laws, or even support collective action. This can lead to a breakdown of social unity and make it even harder to address the challenges we face.
It sounds like a vicious cycle. The less trust there is, the harder it becomes to solve problems. And that just leads to even less trust.
Right.
So how do we break free from this cycle? How can we rebuild faith in institutions and create a more collaborative and productive political environment?
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it? It demands a multi-pronged approach. We need to encourage transparency and accountability, promote civil discourse, and cultivate a sense of shared purpose.
Okay.
Addressing the economic and social inequalities that contribute to polarization and distrust is also crucial.
It sounds like a daunting task, but it's essential if we want to create a more stable and hopeful future. Looking back at the specific situations we've discussed, are there any signs of hope? Are there individuals or organizations out there?
Absolutely. Despite the negativity that often dominates the news, there are countless people working tirelessly to make a positive impact.
Okay.
For instance, numerous grassroots organizations are advocating for greater government transparency and accountability.
Okay.
They're pushing for stronger ethics rules, more robust whistleblower protections, and greater public access to information.
Those are all critical steps toward restoring public confidence in government. What about the private sector? Are there businesses or entrepreneurs out there?
Definitely. More and more companies are realizing that building trust with their customers, employees, and communities is crucial for their long-term success.
Okay.
They're implementing strong ethical guidelines, investing in diversity and inclusion initiatives, and prioritizing sustainability and social responsibility.
That's encouraging to hear. It sounds like a movement towards a more values-driven approach to business is gaining momentum.
Exactly. Recognizing the importance of building trust and a shared sense of purpose. And this movement isn't just coming from CEOs and executives. Employees and consumers are also driving it.
Okay.
They're demanding more. From the companies they work for and support, they're making choices with their wallets and their voices, backing businesses that align with their values.
That's a powerful force for change. It demonstrates that even amidst widespread distrust, there's a deep longing for ethical and responsible leadership in both the public and private sectors.
It highlights the importance of individual action. Each of us can play a role in rebuilding trust.
Okay.
We can stay informed, engage in civil discourse, support organizations that promote ethical behavior, and hold ourselves and others accountable to high standards.
It's a great reminder that we all have a part to play in shaping a more just and equitable society. And as we talk about shaping the future, we haven't even touched on the potential impact of artificial intelligence and automation on the political landscape.
That's a crucial point to consider as we move forward. AI and automation have the potential to revolutionize many aspects of our lives, including governance. It's essential to have thoughtful conversations about the ethical implications of these technologies and ensure they're used in ways that benefit all members of society.
And those conversations need to involve diverse voices and perspectives. We have to make sure that principles of fairness, equity, and transparency guide the development and implementation.
Absolutely. Of these technologies, otherwise we risk further concentrating power and deepening existing divides.
The choices we make today will shape the future of politics and policy. It's up to all of us to stay informed, engage in critical thinking, and advocate for a more just and equitable world.
I couldn't agree more. It's easy to feel overwhelmed by the complexity and challenges of our current political landscape. But we must remember that we have the power to create a better future. By embracing informed action and collective responsibility, we can build a world where trust, fairness, and opportunity are not just aspirations, but realities.
Well said. It's time to move beyond cynicism and apathy and embrace a spirit of hope and engagement. The challenges we face are significant, but they're not insurmountable. By working together, we can create a brighter future for ourselves and generations to come.
We've covered a lot of ground in this deep dive, from presidential firings and Elon Musk's influence through the debate over DEI programs and the erosion of trust.
Right.
We've even touched on the potential impact of technology on the political landscape. It's a lot to process, but I hope it sparked some new thoughts and encouraged you to keep exploring these important issues.
It's been a fascinating conversation, and I appreciate your insightful questions and observations. It's clear that you're deeply engaged with these topics, and your willingness to learn and explore different perspectives is commendable. I have to give credit where credit is due. You've been an incredible guide through this complex terrain. Your ability to connect the dots, highlight key insights, and encourage critical thinking has been invaluable.
It's been my pleasure. I always enjoy exploring these topics with curious and engaged individuals. The exchange of ideas and perspectives is essential to fostering a deeper understanding of our world.
And speaking of exploring different perspectives, I'm curious to hear what our listeners think.
Yes.
What stood out to you as the most surprising or thought-provoking aspect of this deep dive?
We encourage you to share your thoughts with us and continue the conversation. What resonated with you? What questions do you still have? Your insights are valuable and help us all learn and grow.
Remember, this is just the beginning of the conversation. There's so much more to explore and discover. We encourage you to continue your own deep dive into these topics and stay engaged with the issues that matter most to you.
And as you build deeper, remember to be critical of the information you encounter. Seek out diverse perspectives and challenge your own assumptions. Knowledge is power, and informed action is the key to creating positive change.
Before we wrap up, there's one more piece of the puzzle we need to examine. It's something we haven't explicitly discussed yet, but it connects to many of the themes we've explored today. The role of the media.
Yeah, it's true. We haven't directly addressed the media's role in all of this,
Yeah.
but it's clearly a huge influence on how the public perceives events and shapes political discussions.
Absolutely. And with today's fragmented media landscape, it's more important than ever to be a critical consumer of information
Right.
We're bombarded with news and opinions from so many sources that it can be really tough
Yeah.
to separate fact from fiction, bias from objectivity.
It's like trying to navigate a minefield of information. It's easier to get stuck in echo chambers
Yeah.
where we only encounter information that reinforces what we already believe. And that can lead to even more polarization and division.
So how do we navigate this complex media landscape? How do we make sure we're getting accurate and balanced information?
It starts with being aware of our own biases,
Okay.
recognizing that we all have preconceived notions and perspectives that color how we interpret information.
So not just staying in our comfort zones and only reading or listening to things we already agree with.
Right.
It's about exposing ourselves to a range of perspectives,
Exactly.
considering different interpretations of events, and engaging in respectful dialogue, even when we disagree.
Exactly. And it also means being critical of the sources we rely on,
Okay.
checking their track records, considering their potential biases, and looking for evidence-based reporting instead of opinion-driven commentary.
We can't just passively absorb information. We need to actively engage with it,
Right.
question it, and assess its credibility. And we need to be aware of the tactics some media outlets use to manipulate our emotions
Yeah.
and sway our thinking.
Right. Things like using sensationalized headlines, cherry-picking data, or framing stories in a way that pushes a particular agenda. So as you continue your own deep dive into these topics, remember to be vigilant, discerning, and critical of the media you consume. It's an essential skill in today's information age.
It's interesting we started this deep dive talking about the erosion of trust in institutions, and now we're ending it by talking about the importance of trust in the media.
It highlights how trust is a fundamental pillar of a healthy society.
Yeah.
It's crucial for effective governance, economic stability, social cohesion, and making informed decisions. And it's something that needs to be cultivated, nurtured, and protected.
Well said. So as we wrap up this deep dive, what's the one key takeaway you want our listeners to remember?
Stay curious, stay informed, and stay engaged. The world is complex and constantly evolving, and it's up to each of us to navigate its challenges and opportunities with wisdom, compassion, and a commitment to truth.
That's a perfect note to end on. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive. We'll be back next week with another fascinating exploration of a different topic. Until then, stay curious and keep digging.